This is how to change a tire using a 2011 Jetta TDI wagon as an example. The first thing to do is get in the back, and in this example it's a wagon, so it's under the hatchback, not in a trunk. But pull up the covers and get down to your tire and tools kit. There you can see the kit of tools on top of the spare tire. Pull out the tool kit. And to remove the spare, you loosen up this nut, pull it off, and then pull the tire out. Now, just for terminology, we call it a spare tire. The metal part in the middle is called a wheel. The rubber part on the outside is called a tire. So in your toolkit, you're going to find a screwdriver and just gently put it in the middle of each of these lug covers and pry to the side a little bit. Don't break them. They're just plastic, and pull those off. You need to do this before you can get the lug wrench on each of the lug bolts. You do not need to remove the center cap with a little VW badge on it. There's your 5 lug covers, put them somewhere safe. Now take the tire iron, and I'm just going to loosen them just a little bit because the car's still stable and on the ground. You'll notice I'm doing the star pattern. In other words, you don't just go in order around the wheel. You actually go 1 and then skip 2, skip 2, skip 2 until you come back around. Once the 5 lug bolts are broke loose, then proceed with the jack. On this model, you have a reinforced lip right here, and you want to put the jack right on that. Make sure you're putting the jack in the correct place so you don't damage the underside of the car. Before you jack up the car, make sure to block one of the other wheels so that it doesn't roll back. Ideally, this should be the opposite wheel or tire of the one you're changing. You want to have it in park, in this case because it's an automatic, and make sure the park and brake is on as well. You only need to jack up the car just enough to allow some clearance underneath the tire. But remember, this tire is flat, so it's actually a little bit smaller outer diameter than the full spare tire will be. So when you're jacking it up, you want to allow a little bit extra clearance with the flat tire in place. Now you can finish removing the lug bolts. You'll notice I'm doing the star pattern. You always want to do this, tightening or loosening any wheel. Now, since these lug bolts are kind of deep in the wheel, what I'm doing is using those lug covers as almost an extension to be able to grab the head of the bolt and give myself a little bit easier way to remove it. These lug covers actually have a star pattern in the middle, so you could use a wrench if you wanted to do that. Just don't put too much torque to these lug covers because, again, they are plastic and they will break. But this is a lot easier than trying to reach in there with your fingers and get the bolts loose. You can see how the bottom kind of kicks out as the bolts come loose, so when you've got your last ones on the bottom, it's easier to hold the tire inward to make sure that it comes out easy. Now remove the old wheel and tire. Now I want to inspect the tire to see if I can find any flaws, and I actually did find a nail in it, so that's the culprit that was causing the leak. It's a good distance away from the sidewall, so hopefully this can be patched and not replaced. Now for the spare tire. Some cars will actually have a smaller donut tire, but this one is a full size. You can see the wheel looks a little bit different, and that's okay. It's not fancy. It doesn't need to be the center cap or anything. So simply put it in place and then rotate it so that the holes line up between the wheel and the hub. And then start inserting your lug bolts. Now be real sure everything's lined up and do not cross thread these or you're going to have a headache. Be real careful. And again, you can see I'm doing the star pattern. Now I'm going to tighten them by hand. I really should have taken it off the jack before I tightened them all the way. And the other thing I should have done that I didn't is actually torque them properly. I know I only have a couple miles to go to the dealer to get the tire fixed, so I'm not getting out the torque wrench, but really that's the proper way to do it. I've been doing this long enough I can kind of guess at the right torque to make sure they're safe, but the proper way would be to get the torque wrench out after you've taken it down off the jack. Now, if you look at that tire as I'm dropping the car, a little bit squishy at the bottom. Oftentimes your spare tires lose air pressure while in the back of your car. So what I really need is make sure that the air pressure is acceptable and safe to drive on. I'm just going to put the tools, the parts, and the leaky tire in the back of the car now so I can go to the dealer. Now it's time to get the tools back out. In this case, the dealer was able to patch it, and since I bought the tire there, it was covered, so I didn't even have to pay to get it fixed. Again, block the opposite tire, break each of the lugs loose in a star pattern, Find the correct spot for the jack under the car, then start cranking the jack and get the car up. And again, get enough clearance under the tire. And now I can finish taking these lugs off again in the star pattern. Now for the spare tire, the lugs are actually external to the wheel, so it's real easy to grab them. I don't need to use the lug covers like on the stock wheel. Put all those to the side and get the old wheel off and put the normal wheel back on. What I'm going to do is use a little foil on each lug bolt. And this is a habit I've had since I was a kid. Sometimes when these lug bolts or nuts are in place for a long time, they can get kind of corroded and galled and hard to break loose. So this just helps prevent that. And I'm going to use the lug covers on these lug bolts, not putting them on all the way, but just a little bit enough to engage the flats. And that way it's easier to turn them into the hole, again, because they go down inside the wheel. Now, if you already have your 17mm socket out for torquing the bolts, you can also use that to hang on to them and put them inside the wheel. Now, since the lug covers aren't pushed all the way on, they should be pretty easy to take the screwdriver and just pop them back off again, because they can't be torqued with the lug covers in place. And now I'm going to tighten them by hand, again in the star pattern. And ideally you want to be pushing down when you're tightening these things, because that's going to put the motion towards the ground and less chance that you're going to pull up and somehow risk pulling it off the jack or making it unstable. Now that we have it fairly tight, we're going to lower and remove the jack. Your torque spec should be in the manual. For this particular car, it's an 88 foot-pounds or 120 Newton meters. For this car, I'll need a 17mm socket. I like using a deep well because those lugs are down inside the wheel. And I have to use an adapter for that socket to go to the torque wrench that I need for this range. So I'm setting it to the 120 Newton meters. And again, in the star pattern, I'm using this wrench to get everything a little bit tighter, but not all the way. And then once I've done every one once, then I'm going to come back and push it all the way till it clicks, and then I know I'm at the correct torque. If you're not familiar with how to use a torque wrench, that's something that's on my list to make a video for, so watch for that in the future. Once all the lug bolts are tightened, then you can press on the lug covers again and make sure they're all the way in so they don't vibrate off. The next thing is to make sure that your air pressure is correct now. And you don't want to over tighten the valve stems because they can be a pain to take off sometimes. Don't forget to remove your block. Now you want to put everything back in place. The first thing for this model is the spare tire with the wheel face downward, and make sure the center post comes up through the middle. Then put your spin lock back on it. Then you can put all the tools back in the kit and insert that in place in the middle of the wheel. Then just make sure everything's back to the way it was. In this case, I have to reattach the dog mat. And the last step is to reset your TPMS. I know that all the tire pressures are good. This is my target point, and that way the car knows what your baseline pressure is, so it can properly alert you if it falls below a certain range. Even though I no longer have a tire pressure light on, I'm still going to reset it by pushing this button and holding it until the light comes on and beeps to know it's reset.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel below and let's celebrate turning fuel and air into adrenaline!